Welcome to The Concise Consultant. This series of short lecturettes covers some of the main skills needed to work effectively as a management consultant. Hello, my name is Calvert Markham. I'm a management consultant, but for much of my career I've designed and delivered training and consulting skills for individuals and organizations around the world. As part of this work, some years ago I recorded a series of interviews with the broadcaster Michael Bartlett on various topics in consultancy. We called it The Concise Consultant. I've now added some graphics to these interviews. We cover 4 topics. Consultancy and dealing with clients, in which we look at the context in which consultancy is performed. How to deliver consultancy services, which is at the core of a consultant's work. Selling consultancy services, which is essential for anyone working in a consulting practice. And managing the consultancy business, which looks at some of the peculiar challenges involved. This is the third of the series and deals with selling consultancy services. Many professionals dislike the idea of selling, but it is an essential part of the work of a consultant and needs to be performed to the same standards as any other aspect of their work. I hope you enjoy this lecturette and find it useful. Now over to Michael Bartlett.
Calvert, there's an old saying which goes, "Nothing is done in business until someone sells something." Presumably, before I can be a consultant, I have to be a salesman first.
Well, that's not the case, actually. You find sales responsibilities come to a consultant perhaps after they've been engaged in conducting projects for a little while. They move on to the task of selling. And very often in consultancy, you find that people are both selling and operating consultancy projects. Now, of course, one of the things that worries consultants is this topic of selling. And for a lot of folk who've gone into consultancy, when they chose their career, one of the first things they did was to strip out any job that had any mention of sales in it at all. And so when people come to selling consultancy, more often than not only have they not had any experience of selling, they'd rather not have any experience of selling in the future as well. Now, that's what's called call reluctance. In other words, people who don't really want to go out and sell. And it's mainly based on a misapprehension that somehow selling involves getting people to buy things that they don't really want. Now, we said, first thing on the other side, that client relationships were all important. And plainly, you're never going to have a sustainable relationship if you're getting people to buy things that they don't really want or need. And so we have a very simple phrase about selling. It's making it easy for the client to buy.
So what's actually involved in selling consultancy?
Well, there's a simple 4-step process that we advocate. The first thing is finding clients. Next, having found potential clients, you have to find opportunities to work with those clients. When you found that opportunity, then you have to develop some sort of idea of what it is you're going to be doing with them. We call that developing a proposition. And then, when you develop that proposition, you have to pitch for the sale. A 4-step process.
OK, so there's 4 steps. Let's go through them one by one. How do you go about finding clients?
Well, the most ready source of new business are your existing clients. They know you. I hope that they trust you. If they have a need for the sorts of services that you can provide, then you should be providing those services to them. So repeat business is the main source of finding clients. But of course, if you haven't got any clients or you want to expand in a new marketplace, then you need to find new clients, and there are 2 ways of going about that. One I call the product-orientated approach, the other is the market-orientated approach. And I'll just talk about each one of those. The product-orientated approach is where you know what sort of service it is that you're trying to sell or promote to your clients. And so you need to think about what sort of organization might be interested in and take advantage from that type of service. You create a sort of what we call a prospect profile, the sort of organization that might want to buy that from you. And then you look around for organizations that fit that profile. And of course, there's all sorts of libraries and databases that you can use to identify suitable companies and other organizations. What you then do is approach those. You may send out a letter or a brochure of some sort or another and find out whether or not they might be interested by following up by telephone calls or whatever. And from that, you'll get a list of fairly warm prospects who you might then want to go and meet to discover whether or not this is something that they'd like to pursue with you. That's the product-orientated approach. The second is the market-orientated approach, where you say, we are going to be in this marketplace. What are the organizations that we specifically want to target? And this is more of a rifle shot approach than the shotgun approach that I talked about earlier under the product-orientated approach. So you might identify a specific company that you want to do business with, and you will then think about, well, how do I get in front of the right people of that company? Ought I to be producing some sort of presentation to them? Do I have anybody who can act as a link with that company, who can get me a meeting there? And it's very, very focused.
If you have a good relationship with an existing client, I can understand that they may want to meet you to talk about further business. But how do you persuade new clients to meet and talk with you?
Well, that is really a function of how well you've targeted the organisations that you might want to talk to. I mean, plainly, if you've just done it on a random basis, the chances are that they will not want to talk with you. On the other hand, if you've correctly assessed what their needs are, then there's quite a good chance that they may want to talk with you. And that's the whole process of what we call qualification, deciding which organisations you're going to target. It's easy for you to waste a lot of time on organisations which are never likely to be clients. The phrase here is, it's very easy to be a busy fool. And also it's important to have realistic expectations about how you can win new business. There's a phrase in marketing which is, you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you get a prince. And so you should have realistic expectations of conversion rates. It may take 10, 20, 30 approaches before you actually find an organisation that's ready to meet with you. There's another dimension too, which is about earning the right to have a conversation with someone. How should they know that it's going to be a worthwhile investment of their time? Let me give you a very simple example. Your plumber has come to fix the central heating, and you mention that you're about to move house. And the plumber says, well, I can do conveyancing as well. Would you be very happy about getting your plumber to do the conveyancing? And the answer for most of us would be no. But that plumber may be the best deal in town as far as conveyancing is concerned. And so it's not a question about the quality of the deal. It's really a question of, do I believe that this person can provide the right sort of service? And we distinguish between those two things by calling them extrinsic and intrinsic selling. Extrinsic selling is about getting people to understand that you are a legitimate provider of a consultancy service. And intrinsic selling is about getting them to accept the particular deal that you have in mind.
Calvert, the next step you mentioned was spotting an opportunity. How do you do that?
Well, the first thing to look for is, what's the state of readiness of an organisation for the sorts of services that you might have on offer? And here you might just look back at people who've bought your services in the past. What have been the characteristics of organisations that have used your consultancy? And you might then say, well, what other organisations have those characteristics? So, for example, if 6 out of 8 of your last clients have been medium-sized IT companies, then you might seek new clients from amongst other medium-sized IT companies. There may be other things that are indicators of opportunities. For example, news items about change in a particular industry. There may be some sort of international event that precipitates change. There may be a regulatory change. But more often than not, in my experience, people tell you that they've got a problem and that they're going to need your help with it.
So then you go off and write a proposal.
Well, no, you don't. There is actually an important intermediate step. Just because someone has asked you to provide some consultancy help doesn't mean to say necessarily that you're the best person to provide it, that they indeed do need a consultant to help. Is it work that you want to do? Do you have the capacity to do it? What are the risks involved, and so on? And all those things are around the topic of qualification. But assuming that a client said, yes, we have a need here for outside help, we've got a broad feeling for the sorts of areas that you might be involved in, but we're not at all sure what that might be, then you start a process of dialogue. I mean, funnily enough, actually, this very morning I've been to see a new client for the first time, and we are now about to start a process of dialogue which will take several meetings before we even get to the stage of thinking about what sort of work we might do together. What we're doing here is developing a proposition. It's a dialogue which leads to something which I've called terms of reference.
Yes, you mentioned terms of reference earlier on this tape. What exactly are they?
Well, you've got to remember, of course, that consultancy is an intangible product. And if I'm in the business, say, of selling tables, then if I'm trying to sell you a table, I can point to a model that you might want. I might have a catalogue of those models, and I say you're going to get a table on Friday, then you have a pretty good idea of what you're going to get. It's not the same in consultancy. Selling can be thought of as the process of product specification in consultancy. The dialogue that you have with your client in developing a proposition is really the process of specifying what is this consultancy product that they're going to get at the end of the day. And terms of reference, if you like, are the product specification, and they consist primarily of three main headings. First thing is, what are the areas of concern that are going to be addressed in this project? Secondly, what are we going to do to address those areas of concern? And thirdly, what will the client get at the end of the project? This can involve extensive dialogue, as I've already indicated, but at the end of all that, what you then do is to come to an agreed proposition with the client.
And then you pitch for the sale?
Yes, this is when you put in your proposal. And a proposal contains the terms of reference and the terms of business. The terms of business are covering the commercial aspects, in other words, how much you expect the client to pay, when you're expecting them to pay you fees, and so on. It's important to remember also that a proposal is a selling document. And in consultancy, broadly you find there are two or three areas of sales that are involved in a proposal. The first thing that you're going to be looking at selling is, why should this project be conducted in the first place? The second area of selling is, why should this client organisation use consultants to assist them in this project? And the third is, why should you use our specific consultancy to help you?
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, it seems quite possible that a client might ask several consultants to bid for the same piece of work. How can I make sure that they choose me?
Well, you can't. If all other things are equal, then a client's going to choose between consultants based on price, but rarely are all other things equal. And indeed, a lot of consultants carefully make sure that all other things are not equal. So really you've got to think about what's really important to the client. What are the things that they're specifically looking for? And in general terms, there are two things that clients are looking for, and this has been validated in a whole range of surveys. Two simple things. Do these consultants truly understand what we want? And the second thing is, are their people any good?
Well, in that case, how do you handle a sales meeting?
Well, a sales meeting, if you think about it, is like a little bit of consultancy. What happens is you come into the client organisation. During the course of the meeting, you collect some information, you may analyse it, and at the end of the meeting, you come up with a recommendation about what's going to happen next. And as such, a client's going to make a judgment about how good you are on how well you conduct that meeting. Now, if you're going to conduct these meetings really well, you have to do some preparation beforehand. And although people know that they ought to be preparing for a sales meeting, few of them give much constructive thought to what they need to do beforehand. And there are two broad areas that you need to think about. What do I want to have achieved by the end of this meeting? And secondly, what are we going to talk about at this meeting? And if we think about what do I want to have achieved, that's all about targets, isn't it? And of course, the client's going to be wanting to achieve some things as well at a meeting. So you need to think about what do they want to get out of the meeting, because plainly, if you're able to help them, then they're going to be more favourably disposed towards you. From your own side, there are going to be several areas of interest from your point of view. Number one is, what sort of relationship do you establish with the client during the course of this meeting? Secondly, What sort of information are you going to collect? It might be about the nature of the consultancy help that they want. There may be some commercial information. For example, who are the competitors who might be bidding for this work? And obviously, you want to somehow facilitate their buying process so that you're going to be the chosen consultant at the end of all that. And that's all the business of setting targets before the meeting. Where do you want to get to by the end of the meeting? The second area I mentioned is about the agenda. What are we going to be talking about? Now, a good definition of a bore is somebody who's talking about themselves when I want to talk about myself. And the great risk for consultants is, because they're technical experts, is they just love talking about their subjects. And so one of the key things is to probe with the client and find out exactly what they want to happen. And then you have a much better chance of meeting that criterion I just mentioned, which is, do they really understand what we want?
Calvert, are there any golden rules for successful selling?
I think there are one or two. The first is listen. And we have a rule here: when you're not talking, you're not screwing up. The second thing is to find out what's bothering the client. And here, just be fascinated with the client's problem, not by selling them something. And happily, this is something which consultants find quite easy because, of course, one of the reasons we're in the business of consultancy is because we are fascinated by the sorts of problems that our clients have. The third one is, how do you see the subject of selling? Do you see it as an arm's length transaction? Or do you see it, as I prefer to see it, as engaging in a joint venture with a client? And if you think what I've been saying, I've said that projects really are joint ventures between client and consultant. As a final thought, remember that the only way that a client has of judging your consultancy is through you if you're selling that consultancy. If you come across very poorly during the sales process, then it's going to be more difficult to sell consultancy than if you conduct the sales process well.
That completes this session on selling consultancy services. Here's what we covered. What background do salespeople in consultancy need? What's involved in selling consultancy? Finding clients. How do you persuade new clients to meet you? Spotting an opportunity. Developing a proposition. Pitching for the sale. How to win the sale. How to handle a sales meeting. And golden rules of selling. In this short session, we have only touched on these topics. If you want to know more, you may like to take a look at some of my other publications or at further training. I'll be giving details on each of these in a moment, but on the topic of selling consultancy services, you'll find that the top consultant is particularly relevant. Practical management consultancy should be really helpful to those who are recent recruits to management consultancy, as well as a useful refresher to more experienced consultants who want to revisit the basics. The core of the book is a detailed treatment of the consultancy delivery process, which I have called the consult process, and which consists of 5 stages. Entry, in which you establish a relationship with a client. Contracting, agreeing what you're going to do and how you do it. Diagnosis, in which you gather information and work out how the client's situation is to be addressed. Intervention, where you work with a client to put your solutions in place, and closure, completion of the project and withdrawal. This is supported by chapters on the supporting techniques that consultants need in their tool bag, for example, report writing and problem solving. Finally, there are chapters on contextual matters, commercial aspects, and working in a consulting practice. The top consultant addresses the skills required of more experienced management consultants and has a more commercial edge than practical management consultancy, covering, for example, managing a consultancy business, product definition and marketing in consultancy, the consultancy sales process, consultancy problem solving, and commercial aspects of consultancy. Joe Omani wrote the first edition of Management Consultancy in 2010. Over the many years I've been teaching consultants and students, this is by far the best critical examination of management consultancy and the various aspects of it. It is a truly excellent book for students of the subject. I therefore had no hesitation in making this the set book for the courses I've run at MSc and MBA levels. I was therefore delighted when Joe asked me to contribute to the second edition in 2013. I added only a little to what was already a very comprehensive book, but Joe's been kind enough to cite me as the second author. There are 4 perspectives covered in the book. Descriptive, outlining what consultancy is and its business. Practitioner, setting out the practicalities of delivering consultancy and the commercial aspects of it. Critical, setting out the challenges for institutions and individuals in consultancy. And career, which is of interest to the many students who are considering the possibility of becoming a management consultant. All these books are available on Amazon. In a different medium, you may like to take a look at Henry Stewart Talks, which are in a format similar to the one you've just seen. The series on management consultancy contains a number of lectures by academics on contemporary issues. I've contributed one on the consulting project cycle. Finally, there are lots of training courses available for consultants, and so it'd be remiss of me not to refer you to those run by the company that I founded, now called Elevation Learning. Their suite of courses includes core skill programs, covering the essential skills needed in any consultancy business, in-depth skills for consultants going beyond the core skills, developing competence in aspects of the consulting process, working with clients, and commercial skills. And finally, managers may find themselves thrust into a consulting role as internal consultants, or technical specialists such as engineers may need consulting skills to work effectively with clients. Internal service deliverers such as HR and IT need these skills if they are to provide excellent service to their in-house clients. Courses in engagement skills for technical specialists and internal consultants will help them to perform well in all these roles. You can see all these courses and others on the Elevation Learning website. There are, of course, many other resources available to both beginners in consultancy and experienced practitioners. Thank you for your attention.